And now, for the first time in forever on PC, you can experience End of Eternity. At least that's what they called it in Japan. Over here, we ended up getting a different name, probably because marketing and trademarking and stuff like that. Somebody here in the US has to have that trademark. End of Eternity? I mean, we have tons of metal bands and rock bands and things like that that would definitely want that name. Anyways, here's the intro cutscene, so you can end up observing some of the quality and stuff like that of the actual FMVs or pre-rendered cutscenes and stuff like that. They're kind of grainy and stuff like that, but I'll talk about that a little bit later once we get into the quality of the port. Because Michael here, and today we have a PC overview for Resonance of Fate, which is what it was called here in the US and in the UK and stuff like that. So if you're not in Japan, then there you go. Also, one cool thing is if you go into the options, sorry, I'm excited about this because I'm glad that they ended up doing this, but we go to the text and we change it to Japanese and we go back, End of Eternity. I love it when games do that. Anyway, so this is another port by Tri-Ace. Their previous one for Star Ocean wasn't particularly great, but it ran, and it at least had solid performance and stuff like that. This one mostly does. There's one or two issues with this port that I have. It doesn't have a lot of options, and it's severely lacking in stuff like that, and scalability and things like that, resolution especially. However, performance-wise, it only has two different issues, and they could easily be patched, I assume. Maybe they can't, because maybe it's an engine limitation, but seeing as Star Ocean didn't have these problems, maybe it could be fixed on that end. But anyway, so it mostly has the same about quality as Star Ocean did. So if you want a quick overcap, there you go. Now, Resonance of Fate is not one of the games that I ended up playing back on the 360, so I'm really excited to actually be able to play it, and so far I've actually been loving the game. However, if you want my initial thoughts on the game, make sure to skip ahead, because first I'm going to be going over PC like options and the settings and performance and stuff like that, as I always do. But if you're only interested in my thoughts, go ahead and skip ahead for those. Now, that is relevant to mention because they did end up patching this game and fixing up patching it as in like, they ended up fixing up some of the exploits and some of the bugs and things like that in this version. At least that's what people have been saying. And so basically they did more than just up-res the textures and throw the game out there. Also, one thing to mention is that one thing that this game has done is they actually put the high resolution textures into a DLC pack instead of just downloading it with the game, which makes the game size very manageable. So if you don't have a lot of space or you're not going to be using those high resolution textures, you can just download the game without having to worry about downloading all these 4K textures and stuff like that. And quite frankly, the 4K textures may not even be worth it. So if you don't want 4K textures, you don't have to worry about downloading 80 gigs of data. But if you want them, you kind of do. But anyways, we'll talk about that a little bit later. First off, let's go ahead and go into the options. So we'll go into gameplay a little bit later, but first off, let's go ahead and talk about what graphic settings. Now, performance-wise, my performance has actually been pretty dang solid, with the exception of one issue, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. And then some people have been reporting an audio issue. Again, I'll talk about that after we go over the settings. But first off, we got shadow buffer here, which this is the quality of the shadows essentially. Now, I didn't notice anything about the shadows while changing this. However, I did notice that in some of the bigger areas, I did notice a big difference, because obviously the bigger the shadow, the bigger this is going to change. But character shadows and things that don't really benefit all that much. You can end up running on 2 times to get really the same experience as 4 times. I just have it on 4 times because why not max everything out? But anyways, so one thing about shadow buffer is it strangely made the game less blurry and more sharper when I ended up going on 4 times, which is kind of nice. And I have a feeling that shadow buffer actually affects some of like the light beams and things like that are actually rendering. And so that might actually have something to do with it. So keep that in mind if you're having the game look a little bit blurry. You can also turn off anti-aliasing. Now, one thing that's kind of annoying is that it doesn't describe what any of these are. Like, I don't know what size the shadow buffer is to begin with, or what it is on 4 times. Same thing with anti-aliasing. And that's annoying because if I go to initial anchor position over here in the gameplay settings and I hit the back button, it actually shows a nice little help box. Why doesn't it show that for literally every single option in here? That's the only menu that actually has that help button there. It would be really nice to actually just have that on any of these. I don't know why it's not there, but there you go. That's not particularly new, and it makes the port kind of annoying, but there we go. We got camera blur, which isn't motion blur. It's actually blur when the camera's moving, and it actually has a blur on the edge of the screen. So if you don't like that, you can end up turning it off. You'll see it when we get into gameplay and combat. Depth of field is a very, very low resolution for some reason. It does, however, help hide a lot of the stuff that's ugly. It doesn't affect the stuff that's actually in the gameplay and stuff like that. It only affects like the way background, and they use it for cutscenes and stuff like that, which if you turn it off, those cutscenes look a little bit strange just kind of sitting there for a long period of time. So I recommend leaving it on. It's actually not a terrible effect, and it does help hide some of the stuff that does not look great to begin with. And so having the depth of field be low resolution to begin with doesn't really matter all that much, because it's hiding stuff that you really realistically shouldn't be seeing anyways. But it's nice that you're able to turn it off just for performance reasons. Then you get texture resolution. Again, I was talking about how you have to download the high resolution pack.
I am playing with the high resolution textures. I'll talk a little bit more about them once we end up getting into game, but quite frankly, like most 4K texture packs, unless you are running on something above 1920 by 1080, you are not going to want to download this pack and just run it on low, which is actually the standard textures that you would get with the normal game, which is like 1K to 2K or 5K or 500, not 5K, wow, 500 or whatever. So those are actually perfectly fine if you're running at 1920 by 1080. However, if you're running above that, you will notice a difference between your texture resolution when going to high. It's not a big difference, but it's enough that it can matter. And then you get screen resolution. We're stuck at 16 by 9. Also, you'll notice no frame cap option. It is capped at 60 FPS. And then obviously screen resolution here. These are the only resolution options I have, and so I'm going to assume you're stuck to this. I have seen people report that it doesn't support ultra wide or 16 by 10. And so basically, if you're running on those resolutions, you're either going to get stretching or you're going to get black borders, depending on your Windows settings. And so that's a little bit unfortunate. I wasn't expecting anything outside of 16 by 9, but I was expecting more resolution options. I don't know if it adjusts based on your monitor. I'm running at 1440, but you can go up to 4K, and I'm not even running my system to support 4K at the moment. And so yeah, that's kind of interesting. It would have been nice to actually have these. Maybe these are hard-coded into the game. I don't know, but it's a little bit unfortunate we don't have more. And then full screen is actually borderless. You can turn it off for windowed mode. One thing about the window is that it stays on top of all windows on my machine for some reason. So if I want to use something, if I have it in windowed mode, for example, and I move like Google Chrome or something like that behind it, I can't see Google Chrome no matter if it's active or not, which is a little bit annoying for using the windowed mode and kind of defeats the purpose of using windowed mode. But anyways, full screen is also borderless mode, and it does not lock the mouse cursor to the window either, which is a little bit annoying. Sound settings, we get the multiple volume sliders. That's kind of nice. Also, one thing to mention is that in gameplay, it will lock it to the window. It only doesn't in the menus and stuff like that. I feel like that's a distinction I should make when we talk about it. I'll talk more about it when we get into controls. Multiple volume sliders, which is super, super nice. The sound balance is a little bit all over the place in certain cases, to where sometimes the music gets really, really quiet and sometimes it's really, really loud. Don't know why. We get speaker output. You have stereo, surround. Also, you have the speaker position thing, which is, oh my god, so joyfully retro. So we used to see these on console versions of games before we got really good configurable systems, pretty much standard and home. But yeah, you can end up making a little character go around and talk and stuff like that.
Hey, over here. I thought it was this way. Hello?
I love it.
Hey, over here. This way.
It is perfectly nostalgic. Yeah, we used to have these in pretty much every game that supported surround sound, but it's completely useless on PC, but I love it just for nostalgic reasons. I'm sure it was available on console, and that's why it's here. Anyways, you get your button display, so you can actually change the key bindings and stuff like that as well. You get your subtitles and your voices. I don't know why this isn't in sound settings, but whatever. Voice language, it did default to Japanese for me. Don't know why, but I just switched to English because I'm English. And then you get English, Japanese, French, German, Spanish, and Italian for your text languages. There's no Chinese option, strangely enough, so if you're Chinese, you're going to be out of luck unless you know English. If you're watching my video, you'll know English, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, that's a little bit strange. And then obviously you get your other control options. So you get your inverted controls, which they call it reverse, but it's just inverted. It does affect the mouse as well, which is super nice. Anchor has to do with gameplay. I'll talk about those a little bit later. And your initial anchor position and turn settings. Button configuration, you are able to rebind a little bit on the gamepad. So if I wanted to make YA, for example, I could end up rebinding those, but if I wanted to make it the right bumper or left bumper trigger or any of the D-pad and stuff like that, you can't rebind it. And same thing for these. I can't make like switch targets A, for example. I'd have to make it left bumper or right bumper or whatever. So that's a little bit annoying. You also can't rebind the other auxiliary buttons. However, it does support the Steam's rebinding feature and stuff like that. I have it disabled at the moment, but if you want to try using that for like a generic controller and that configuration won't work for you, you can end up doing that. So there you go. Key configuration as well. You can rebind absolutely everything, but you cannot use modifiers such as Control-Alt-Shift. You also can't double bind, and the mouse is considered a different one here. Now, one thing to mention is that you actually don't have any mouse control on the menus, which is a little bit annoying. You have to use the scroll wheel or WAS and D to move around, and no, the arrow keys do not work. And so that's a little bit annoying, but again, key configuration, you can rebind everything. You can't double bind, which is a little bit unfortunate, but you can rebind absolutely everything. And then there's the move camera for that. That also works with the mouse as well, which we'll talk about once we get into gameplay. So there we go. That's the options. Now again, performance-wise, I have had pretty dang solid performance except for one freaking issue, and people have reported one other issue that I didn't have, and I had one other person talking about it on Twitter about that issue as well. And so basically, yeah, there's one major issue that I haven't had in this game, and I don't know how to fix it because I haven't seen them fix it. However, for the performance issue, I do know how to mitigate it. So here we are in game. You'll notice that it definitely looks retro. That was our little base hub and everything, and for some reason I'm this chick. I don't know. You can actually switch characters at will. But anyways, I'll stay on her because she's pretty. Yeah, so basically here's the overworld. You'll actually see, or well, this is one of the towns and stuff like that. We'll talk about the overworld a little bit later, but you can definitely see the game is aging. Now on the capture, you really won't be able to see the differences that the texture makes, but when it comes down to the actual textures of the game, when the difference between the low resolution and the high resolution textures really isn't all that great. However, the high resolution textures do have a little bit of graininess to it, but it also does add a lot of little tiny detail to certain objects, especially on the characters. For example, on the belt, which I can't really look at it here. And whatever. Anyways, on the belt, you'll notice a lot of detail increasing. However, it doesn't look like it was like handmade 4K textures or anything along those lines. Instead, it looks like it was just kind of like, oh, hey, here's some textures and we're just going to up-res them and then slightly touch up some of them here and there, which you can tell which ones they touched up, aka the character textures, and the environment textures they really didn't get improved at all. There's some things that do have a lot more detail in it. I'm not going to say that it doesn't. But overall, it doesn't really help with quality all that much. It does help it look a little bit sharper, especially when you get into some of the battlefields and stuff like that. But again, it's not really worth the download size for most people. And if you're running on 1920 by 1080, don't even freaking bother. I did capture some footage of it, by the way. However, the footage it looks exactly the same because, again, the textures are not drastically different. They're just the same textures, just slightly touched up. And I'm recording this in 1920 by 1080, and so you're not going to be able to see it there either. And YouTube will compress the living hell out of it. But there's a little stuttering issue. I have noticed that it happens every single time I go over here. Whether it'll show up on the capture, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm sure it will. But the game randomly has this issue. This is talking about the performance issue, to where it just drops randomly, and my hard drive ends up spiking up. Now, one issue that I had trying to start the game was that I was getting some ASCII error to where it was like failed to initialize. And that was happening because the game requires your system to have a paging file, which is a little bit frustrating because on my system, I actually had my paging file disabled because certain games on Windows 10 will crash if you have a paging file. This game's the opposite, to where it won't run unless you have a paging file. So I had to go ahead and set up a paging file. So if you don't know how to do that, you just end up going to your control panel, which you can use Katana for that. You go to your control panel, you go to system settings, and then you end up going to advanced system settings, which should be on the left side. I'll have a video playing though. I'll actually show you where to do all this stuff. And then in that menu, there's another option that you click, and then you go down to your performance settings, and then you go to your paging file, and you can actually edit it there. So if you don't have one, I recommend having it on a hard drive, and if you have it on SSD, immediately remove it from your SSD because that'll destroy your SSD basically and shorten the lifespan. Anyways, back to the actual game itself. That was the only issue I was having, and after I actually increased the maximum size of the paging file to 6 gigs, in my case, it ended up pretty much like making it so that little performance issue actually never really ended up happening all that often. I noticed it in very, very specific spots, and I assume that's because the game probably uses the paging file to try. Oh, hey, we're getting to combat already. Sweet. I assume it's because the game is using the paging file to probably load from like a disk basically, and so it's probably using the paging file to act as if that's the disk, and then it loads from there to get that data, because the game really, oops, I didn't want to even use that. The game doesn't really even use any sort of RAM as well. I shouldn't have to use a paging file because I have 32 gigs on my system. In that video clip, you'd probably end up seeing it. But yeah, I really shouldn't have to use one. But again, the game has some sort of limitation within the engine to where it's just end up using them. So keep that in mind, that if you don't have a paging file, you're going to have to make one. So every time you want to play the game, you'll need a paging file. I don't know why I went all those extra shots and stuff like that. I guess to prolong the gameplay here. But yeah, now it's stuttering a lot. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm recording. It might be OBS. OBS has hated me recently. In fact, it took me an hour to even get this game recording, so apologies for that. But yeah, here's the overworld as well. You're able to look around and stuff like that. The HUD and stuff like that is very crisp and clean, I will say, on a 1440 monitor. So that is really, really super nice. Again, you are going to have to be stuck with 16:9, so it might change depending on your system. And if you try to end up stretching it and stuff like that, you might have a little bit of issue. But yeah, for me, so far, it's ran perfectly fine after that, aside from those little tiny performance stutters, and I assume that's something that can be patched. Now, if they don't patch that, that's going to be super annoying. But it also doesn't... Whoa, why did it happen again? Okay, so just a note here, it just happened again. It has not happened this much since I have been playing. This is, like, when I was playing, before I even, like, increased my size on the paging file, it only happened like once or twice. It normally isn't happening this much. So maybe there's something you're supposed to do to fix it, and I just don't know exactly what I did, and maybe I accidentally did it. So I don't know. Anyways, that's an annoying issue, but it doesn't kill the game. However, there is one issue that people have been reporting. I'm just going to go back to the title menu and load up my other save so we can go into a dungeon so I can show off that a little bit and then talk about gameplay and my thoughts on the game so far. Anyways, there is one issue that I have not had. However, some people are having this issue and it could completely destroy the game. And basically, it's an audio issue to where, one, you get that stuttering, and then number two, the audio will randomly cut out and randomly have crackling here and there in various different spots. Now, Star Ocean had this problem, and it had to do with a crash that the game was having when you tried to run anything that wasn't 48K on your sound driver or whatever. So I'm going to load up my dungeon save here. And so that might be a similar issue. I'm not having the issue whatsoever, but it can be kind of destroying. And so here's some of the dungeons and stuff like that. We'll go into a dungeon. Yeah, so basically what it'll end up doing is that while you're playing the game, it'll just randomly... Oh, I don't want to use him. I want to use him. There we go. I don't want to run that way either. Yeah, so basically what it'll do is it'll cause audio crackling, and sometimes it'll cut out and then just not be active. I don't know the specifics of it because, again, I'm not having the problem. And so I can't necessarily talk about it all that much. So there you go. But if you're having that issue, I also wasn't able to find a way to fix it. So... apologies there. Normally I end up finding something to fix it, and at least this issue I thought I found a fix, but I guess I didn't. I don't know. That's just an issue that they're going to have to patch. And again, this audio issue they couldn't end up patching as well. The game did just release. Star Ocean had to be patched a few times until it actually ended up fixing things, but there you go. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Another issue that I added with the game is that there's also... Actually, I forgot to show this while I was in the title screen, so let's go ahead and go back. Also, you'll notice a lack to exit the game. This was a problem in Star Ocean as well. And I actually completely forgot about it while I was doing all this because it's so crazy to think of, like, you just think that this is something that you would include in every single game. And I think I had the same exact reaction in Star Ocean to where I completely forgot about it and then remembered like halfway through. Yeah, there's no way to exit the game. So if I hit start here, there's no exit to desktop. Alt F4 doesn't work. I'm tapping Alt F4 right now. Escape doesn't do anything. There's no way to exit the game. And you would think, oh, we gotta load into the game. I think in Star Ocean, it was somewhere obscure. Like I actually had to load into the game or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was. I loaded the wrong save too. Whatever, we can just go to combat somewhere else. But yeah, so if you go into menu here, we only have exit to title. And if we go into our actual menu here, there's no exit game option anywhere. It's not in the options either. You also notice while you're in the game, you can't change your texture resolution or anything like that, or your resolution. So that's a little bit annoying. So once you end up starting up the game, you can't go into the screen resolution. You can hold Alt and Enter to end up going into window mode. And so it does support that at least, and you can resize the window as well. So you can use that to actually resize and change your resolution, I assume. But yeah, so you also can't change your voice language or your text while you're in the game as well. So again, a little bit annoying, but it's not really that big of a deal. It's not something you'll normally change during gameplay. So yeah, so it's kind of weird that that's not an option to actually exit the game. And that's pretty much all that I got for the PC overview. I mean, it's all right. It's not a great port, but it runs and you can play it, and it's going to be the quality that you had at least on the console. And it actually has some advancements. People were talking about how they fixed up some exploits and they fixed up some bugs, and so they did end up fixing some things, which is super, super nice, and it's actually pretty dang cool to end up seeing that. So that's good. At least they fixed some things, but of course you end up getting this performance issue, which is just super annoying. And these are things that could be easily patched, and I really hope they do, because so far, I actually like this game. I like it a lot. I love its style. I love how painfully retro it is in both the goods and the bad. There are some things that I'm really annoyed about, especially some of the menu navigations and some of the kind of just classic things about it. You know, it does have that problem to where, you know, all the NPCs are just standing around just because, you know, you gotta talk to them, and that's what they're there for, and that's literally it. Also, some of the controls are kind of wonky here and there, and it's definitely janky, especially some of the older cutscenes. But the voice acting actually isn't bad. Compared to Star Ocean, Star Ocean's voice acting was absolutely abysmal on most of the characters, but here, the sound quality and stuff like that is actually pretty stellar. It's actually pretty dang good, and I don't know if they actually improved the quality of it or not. It won't let me skip my turn. There we go. And the loading times are really, really quick. You know, talking about the port and stuff like that, the loading times are very, very quick and actually fluid and things like that, and so I'm not really having any problems with that either. And so the game it plays smoothly, and I really like its style. So yeah, that's kind of how it goes. I'm really enjoying the story, even though it's got really nothing in it. It is one of those games to where it's really, really slow start. The tutorial absolutely sucks, because the tutorial, it doesn't force you to go through the tutorial, but you can go to an arena, and then it has a tutorial option there, which I strongly recommend going through it, because the game actually has a lot of different mechanics, and it took me a little bit to get a hang of them, and people were talking about this game actually being fairly difficult, and I've already died once, and I'm only on chapter 2. So yeah, the game actually has quite a bit of a difficulty curve. So if you're looking to actually get into it, it's got some nice little bit of challenge and stuff like that. Obviously, if you get good at it, you know, it's not going to be that big of a deal, but yeah, it's fairly interesting so far, and I really, really like it. As for how well it's aged, not particularly well. It's pretty much the same as Star Ocean as well. Like, it's got a lot of those kind of janky systems that you would have seen in a lot of the older stuff. When it comes down to gameplay and those gameplay options, this little thing that I'm dragging around is called the anchor. So if you wanted to like follow the camera and stuff like that, can I go into the options in here? I can. There we go. So if I go ahead and toggle it to behind, it will follow the anchor around the screen. So that's how that ends up working. But yeah, I'm not even gonna use it because I just want to shoot him real quick, and then use her to go into action mode, hero mode, jump up, look stylish, and shoot him in the top of the head. The physics are a bit wonky as well. I don't know if that's because of the game or if that's because of the, you know, the port and everything like that. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, and traveling around is a little bit janky. I would have loved a speed up option in the game. That would have been super, super nice to have some sort of speed up option. And some of the locations and stuff like that are a little bit dull when it comes down to it. Can I not target things that are not on screen? Ooh, I do not like it when it's behind the thing. I like it as fixed because then it stays behind my character and I can see around and see where it's going and stuff like that. So I like that. But if you want the other option, there you go. Also, it's got directional damage as well. So if I jump above those guys, I can actually shoot the barrel on top instead of trying to shoot its legs. Super stylish, and I love its humor. Like, its story doesn't really have much going on, but there's enough mystery that I'm like, I want to know what's going on. And the style of humor is great. There was one particular little cutscene to where they were talking about, oh, looking up at the stars, it's like my perfect star. And then it was like, you know, went over to its industrial style thing to where there was a star that had an advertisement on it. It was like this goofy, ugly face. And this girl here was looking at it and just, they were talking about it. It's like, oh, what a dream. And then it's like, yeah, everyone's got their star. And then it looks up and then that thing pops up and it's like, ugh. And she's just like, ugh. And while the cutscenes are kind of janky in some of their animations, and sorry, I'm just running into the wall because I'm not really paying all that much attention. While some of the cutscenes and stuff like that are pretty janky, especially when it goes into some of the smaller character animations, when it's like, oh, this isn't a key character or this isn't a key animation or whatever, then, you know, they're just like, yeah, whatever, we'll just give it some janky animation. So there was like a girl swatting at flies or something like that, for example, and it just looks like she's waving at the air and it just looks awkward. So it's not, you know, great by any means. It's not going to be like Final Fantasy levels of cutscenes or anything along those lines, but it's good enough to get the point across, and it's fun, and I love the style of this game. And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't have this industrial fantasies type of stuff going on. And so for me, personally, being able to go back and play one of those games, even though it is an older game, it does the style well. And there's actually a lot of interesting sort of battlefields and things like that that we'll end up seeing throughout the game as well that just make the game more interesting and stylish in a lot of senses. And so, yeah, it's got my style of humor and it's got my style of style. And so, yeah, I love it because of that. And the gameplay is fun, fast, fluid. It's got some more in-depth mechanics, and so if you're not particularly great at a lot of these styles of games, then it takes quite a bit of getting used to, and there's a lot of little in-depth mechanics that aren't necessarily explained unless you want to go through a really long, monotonous tutorial, which isn't particularly great. I think that it could have used some tutorial while you're going through the gameplay, but at the same time, it's nice to have one that doesn't hold your hand the entire freaking time. So that's nice. Also, the switching target's a little bit janky as well. Yeah, so overall, my thoughts on it so far, pretty dang good. Port's not amazing, but it doesn't have to be. It's what it needs to be, I would say. So yeah, it's also got a lot of timed-based stuff. Like if I time that right, I could end up doing 2 shots, but I just didn't because, quite frankly, I'm not caring about this fight because this isn't even a save I'm going to keep. So yeah, that's Resonance of Fate, or End of Eternity if you're Japanese. So yeah, it's pretty good game. I actually recommend it so far. I can't recommend it fully because, again, you know, it's going to be a cautionary recommendation because I'm not through the entire game. And again, if there's any major performance issues or major glitches or anything like that in the game, like there could be a game-breaking bug at the very end of the game. So do make sure to look at like proper reviews and things like that for the PC version. But this isn't a game that I'm necessarily going to be looking at doing like a full review of because, again, it's so old and just, you know, doesn't really have a lot of people that haven't looked at it. But if I do end up getting the time to finish it, I definitely want to freaking play it. So yeah, I might do a full review if I end up getting that far, but we'll end up seeing. Also, my characters are cowering because I wasn't paying attention to my hero gauge, and so yeah, this game has humor to it. It's got a weird style of humor, but I love its style of humor. There we go, I got one of my hexes back. Oh no, got it, no, not that one. Oh, well, I just wasted the heck out of my turn. But yeah, anyways, that's been, yeah, oh my god, they're grabbing my things. No, I don't like that. Stop it. I'm cowering in fear because of that. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this one. And of course, if you have thoughts, you can leave your comments below. I did that wrong. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. So basically, yeah, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this one. And of course, if you end up liking this style of content, make sure to check out my website and stuff like that, which you're gonna seeing all my other types of projects. And of course, if you end up wanting to join our gaming Discord, God, I've just completely screwed out this outro. So yeah, we also have a gaming Discord and they failed. I was trying to figure out what to do there. Anyways, there is a retry option as well, but it costs monies and stuff. I'm just gonna load because I don't really care. Yeah, I'm gonna keep playing this, so I might do a full review of it. I might not. Keep posting on the channel, subscribe if you're looking forward to it, I don't know. But yeah, you can also check out our gaming Discord, which is called the Rocket Chat Box. Link to that in my website on the description. And yeah, I don't know. I've started streaming again, so if you want to check out my streams, they're every Tuesday right now. So if you want to watch me stream Daggerfall, that's what I'm doing right now. So there you go. Yeah, that's Residence Fate. It's got style. It's got humor. I'm terrible at outros, and I just realized there's an umbrella up there. It's very pretty. Anyways, bye. See you guys in the next video. It's the worst outro I've done in like years. So sorry.